It's good to be with you on this Monday night edition of the People Show on intellectualradio.com, iHeartRadio, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And I am remiss and sorry to have to tell you that my sidekick for tonight is not going to be with us because he is celebrating his 79th birthday. Monroe Anderson, who is a retired veteran journalist who is usually with me tonight, but he's not going to be here tonight, but he'll be back with us next week. So we let him off tonight so that he can go out and celebrate his 79th birthday. And so happy birthday to you, my friend. And we'll see you back here next week. We got a lot of things that we're going to be talking about tonight. Also, I have a guest coming up a little bit later on in the program who's going to come on and talk with us. And his name is Kent Redfield, who is Dr. Kent Redfield, who's Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Illinois in Springfield. And so he's going to be with me a little bit later on. And we're going to be talking about what is happening with Brandon Johnson as the mayor of the city of Chicago and what is going on between Brandon Johnson and the General Assembly. So we're going to be talking about that a little bit later on. But something I read today that that Illinoisans in the Tribune, I saw this article that Illinoisans are paying 26% more for their insurance premiums that they bought on the American Affordable Care Act. And so the state has put forth their own subsidies, and hopefully it's going to bring those costs down. Now, that cost may seem like it is a rise, and about 4% fewer people have signed up on the exchange in the state of Illinois this time around than this time last year. But that 26% increase would seem like a far cry away from the 78% jump in cost as a result of the Congress failing to extend the subsidies from the Affordable Care Act. That is causing for some people to make decisions on whether or not they're going to have insurance. And because the state has enacted its own subsidies, it is helping to mitigate some of that, but it is still where premiums are raising by 26%. We were trying to get the reporter to come on to talk about her reporting on this on the Chicago Tribune on that particular article, but it was something that I read today in preparing for tonight's program, that of course healthcare in this country, which is something that is still astonishing to many of us, that we're here in the richest country in the developed world, and then all of the countries in Europe, they have free healthcare and they have free colleges, and even some of the European countries, they even pay their citizens to go to college. They get stipends to support them going to college. Here in the richest country in the world, we have a president currently who says that we can't provide basic health care for people. We can't provide daycare for our children here in this country. This is the richest country in the nation, and we still have people we have more billionaires than they have anywhere else in the country. And we have where our president is saying that we can't provide basic fundamentals for people here in this country, but we can spend $1 billion a day in a war that the president has decided that he wants to have on his own, and but we can't provide basic needs. Now, someone should tell the president to talk with the people in his cabinet, because certainly people in his cabinet are saying the same thing 2 days apart, where the president is saying, well, we can't do this. And then Marco Rubio is saying, then what, Iran could be using that money to take care of his people.
Imagine in Iran that instead of spending their wealth, billions of dollars supporting terrorists or weapons, had spent that money helping the people of Iran, you'd have a much different country.
The United States can't take care of daycare. That has to be up to a state. We can't take care of daycare. We're a big country. We have 50 states. We have all these other people. We're fighting wars. We can't take care of daycare. It's not possible for us to take care of daycare. Medicaid, Medicare, all these individual things.
So it's not possible for us to take care of daycare. It's not possible for us to take care of our people. It's not possible for us to play Medicaid. Well, it is possible for us to do it. We're not willing to do it. We're not willing to prioritize that the healthcare should not be a fundamental right as it is in every other European developed nation. Education should not be a fundamental right as it is in every other European nation. And they even, as I said earlier, they even pay in some of the European countries, they pay their people to go to college, and college is free. But we can't do that. Meanwhile, we have one person here in this country who has more wealth than the bottom 52% of households in this country. One person controls that much wealth. That is insane. That one person can grasp all of this wealth. Now, this didn't happen by accident. This happened by what I call Ronald Reaganism. Started in 1980 when Ronald Reagan decided that he was going to cut the top tier corporate tax rate that was at one time in this country at 94%, from 74% down to 32%. And what did that mean? That meant that if you, as a CEO, if you took more than a certain dollar amount out of the business, personally, you would have to pay 74 cents. At one time, it was 94%. You'd have to pay 74 cents in taxes, in federal taxes, on every dollar over and above that amount. Today, I think that would amount somewhere around 10, I don't know, it's 30 million or something like that, or 300, whatever. I'd have to go and look it up because I'm not sure of the numbers. But if you took more than a certain amount of money out of your corporation, you'd have to pay that in federal dollars or taxes. Now, what that really meant is that meant that corporations, CEOs at the time, only earned about 30 times that more than the average. This was back in the 1970s, and until Ronald Reagan came into office, CEOs only earned about 30 times that of the average worker. Today, as a result of the Ronald Reaganism and the Ronald Reagan's policies and cutting the top tier tax rate, that was continued by Republicans and Democrats, that was continued, that you now have CEOs that are earning 300, 400 times the average worker, which is showing the astronomical problem of income inequality in this country. I mean, we are fighting about paying people decent wages. We even have here in the city of Chicago, where you have older people of communities that are struggling, that were voting for a policy to protect corporations, where they voted for a budget that would not support a budget where the mayor was asking for corporations that have more than 100 people, and I think there was a certain income generating, but that had a certain more than 100 people, which we had at one time from 1973 up to 2013, when Rahm Emanuel decided that he was going to get rid of the head tax, the corporate head tax. But we were not losing business before then. They might have complained about it, but nobody even it never even made headlines until Ronald Reagan in 1980, and here in the city of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel decided that he was going to favor corporations and was going to play to corporations. Well, he played to corporations, and as a result of that, what took place is that they didn't get rid. They got rid of the corporate head tax. They got rid of the corporate head tax, and again, you had your older people that represent communities that were underserved communities, or were people who are certainly having hard times meeting those income challenges. But here, what he did was to replace the revenue. Now they're saying they're protecting corporations, but they don't really care about everyday, hardworking citizens who are finding it hard to meet their basic needs. So what he did was, they still had to get the revenue. So what he's saying was, what we'll do is we'll get rid of the head tax. This was done simultaneously. This was not done, where they came up with some idea later. It was done simultaneously. They got rid of the head tax. And in order to replace the revenue, Rahm Emanuel introduced and started speed cameras. That's what replaced the revenue. And the revenue was replaced largely by people who were already struggling on the south and west sides of Chicago, because you now and still have, we found through a ProPublica analysis, that there are 3 times more violations of red light camera tickets and speed camera tickets on the south and west sides of Chicago. Not because the people on the south and west sides of Chicago drive any more faster or reckless than the people on the north side of Chicago. It is where they have strategically placed cameras to be in high traveled or high traffic intersections, where you are going to have more traffic, you're going to have more violations. So they made up the head tax by putting the tax on working people, and it is still in existence today. And every other successor since Rahm Emanuel and since Daley, including Lori Lightfoot and including Brandon Johnson, are supporting that policy. Now, Brandon Johnson came in and said that we are going to have corporations to pay and contribute their fair share. And as a result of that, Brandon Johnson proposed the head tax. And as a result of proposing the head tax, the city council pushed back on the head tax, and of course this argument that whether you believe or support that or not, is that somehow they were going to corporations were going to leave the city of Chicago. Well, I think that there was no evidence that shows that where there were a bunch of corporations leaving the city of Chicago, even when they had the head tax, and that there was no real evidence of corporations losing money because they were paying the head tax when the head tax was in effect. So we're going to be talking about that with my guest, who is the professor emeritus of political science at the University of Illinois at Springfield. His name is Dr. Kent Redfield, who is here with us. Dr. Kent Redfield, welcome to the program, and thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
So, you know, this controversy that has been going on with the mayor who is trying to get this head tax paid, or this head tax passed, and of course he's gotten pushback at the city council, but he's also getting pushback at the General Assembly. And I read this article in the Chicago Tribune where the committee chair, Representative Tarver, they passed 19-0 to bring this bill to the floor, which is somehow going to impede home rule for the mayor having the ability to pass this act. Tell me, what is your position, or not necessarily your position, but why is the General Assembly taking this approach against this mayor?
Well, I mean, historically, the mayor of Chicago has been a tremendously powerful figure in Springfield. And, you know, he literally could fire legislators in the next election if they, you know, would cross him on a piece of legislation. And that power has eroded over time for all kinds of reasons. You know, you had two dailies that were, you know, obviously very powerful people that were part of this larger political system within the city of Chicago and Cook County. And, you know, for lots of reasons, you know, it's political parties are weaker. Chicago has lost population. The suburbs are more important. All kinds of reasons why the mayor doesn't, you know, wouldn't have as much power historically as, you know, as have as much power as he had historically. So the question is, you know, why would you fight the powerful mayor of Chicago? And, you know, the question may be, you know, that may be the wrong question. The question may be, you know, if the mayor is weaker and if the mayor is in trouble politically, particularly with, you know, a new election coming up, you know, why would you expend political capital to support someone who might not be around, you know, next year, you know, after the next round of elections, and you know, in the city. And so, you know, the mayor is, you know, whoever is mayor, you know, you're going to be a powerful person in the city. You're going to have, you know, some entree in the legislature, and, you know, an audience with the governor, obviously, but you really have to build those things now rather than just assume I'm mayor, I can go in and dictate things. And so I think that's what you're seeing is a change in kind of the politics as Illinois politics has changed, as power has become more fragmented. Then you've got, you know, it's much more difficult for whoever is mayor to come in, build relationships. And then, you know, another thing I'd mention is if you are a first-time office holder, then you have a learning curve. You have, you know, you don't have political experience in what's the give and take. How do you deal with people of equal or greater power, depending on the situation? And so, you know, you can't come in and just say, I'm the mayor of Chicago and here's what I want to do, and expect everybody else to just say, well, of course. You know, you've got a very independent governor who doesn't need money from anybody to get elected. You've got now two legislative leaders on the Democratic side. Neither one of them is a Chicago legislator. And so you've seen the mayor have problems getting, you know, traction on his agenda, you know, partially because of, style and the way they've gone about it, but partially because, the circumstances have changed. This is not, the old Chicago or old Illinois politics. It's much more, candidate centered as opposed to party centered, if you will, and that makes, individual legislators, individual members of the city council a lot stronger. So, I think those are some of the factors that you see, coming to play in terms of the inability of the mayor to get what he wants, and the willingness of Chicago legislators and members of the city council to take him on. So I think it's this, it's this new reality with a new person that has to build power and build relationships, and it's been pretty rocky, start up to this point.
Well, this head tax started by the first Mayor Daley back in 1973. And this is a part of what Brandon Johnson is trying to get back. And I think that this is a part of the real pushback from the legislature, whether it's a power, move, or whether, they believe in, they just have a different philosophy on this whole head tax piece. This head tax piece was in place until Rahm Emanuel decided to get rid of it, and I believe it was in 2013 that he decided to get rid of the corporate head tax. And but even before then, it wasn't even a campaign argument before that time.
Right.
So the corporations may have been complaining about it, but it wasn't even an issue.
Yeah, it was built into the base, and this is the way we went about things. But Emanuel started this conversation because he came in saying, "I'm going to be much more business friendly. I'm going to try to expand the ability of the city to develop new businesses. And I want to do a different way of thinking about how we raise revenue, how we do business." And so, given his ability, taking over as mayor, and the power that was sitting in that office, and kind of the culture at that time, then he was able to move his agenda. And now you have a much more open situation where the business community, to a certain extent, organized labor, they're looking for, what can we do to have more development? What can we more friendly, business friendly, so we can have more jobs? And so, people are reacting to reimposing the head tax, maybe some talk about the corporate in tax, as kind of, we're going back to kind of doing something that raises money, but it doesn't do anything to attract business, to stimulate development. And can we have is there a different way out there? So there's certainly a policy argument that is being made, and that's combines with, again, the mayor not being in the same position as some of his predecessors and other people that are participants in the process, having, feeling like they're more independent. We can start a conversation, that doesn't begin and end with the mayor's agenda. We can, open up and talk about other things. And so, there's all this, a policy content to this, but there's also, a political power context to this. And so, if the mayor is perceived as weak, then that makes other people more willing to take up an opposite position. And then there's a lot more attention now on how do we do things in terms of economic development. The mayor's been having trouble with the building support for keeping the Bears in Chicago. And, the governor is now talking about, well, we can do support for something that would allow them to move as part of a bigger initiative to be able to raise money to back bigger economic development projects. And so he's trying to reframe the conversation as, this can be part of making Illinois more successful, having more economic development, attracting more jobs, doing more big projects. And then, it is about whether or not the Bears are in Chicago or Arlington Heights. It's about, how do we get an agenda that is going to promote business development, economic development within the state. And so, that's, there's a policy argument there, but then you also have, legislative leaders and a governor that are less willing to just automatically defer to the agenda put forward by the mayor of Chicago. And so, both of those things are at play. And that's a more, that's not saying one is right and the other is wrong. It's just that, you have people that are trying to frame the conversation in a different way and try to build alliances that go beyond just, does Chicago get something or does Chicago not get something, or who's really got the power, but rather, how can we make good policy that is going to grow Chicago, is going to attract people, those kinds of things.
Well, in the article, it did speak about Brandon Johnson never, or anybody from Brandon Johnson's administration, going down to even testify in favor of this policy that they want to. Does this really speak to the fact that the mayor does not have the power that the mayor once had in the city of Chicago?
That's part of it, and part of it is just, you have to build relationships. And if you're a first-time office holder, you're not used to operating this environment, then you need good advisors that have experience, and you need to listen to them. Politics is a very, it's a very transactional, personal process. And so people like to be asked, and they like to be asked personally. And so, when you say, well, they're not calling me, they're not talking to me, that becomes, partially a question of, of respect, of taking people seriously, of going the extra mile to try and build relationships, and not getting yourself in a posture where people think that, you're being, that the mayor isn't paying enough attention because, he doesn't really, respect us or, giving us credit for the role that we play in the process. And, perception is reality. Doesn't matter if that's the intention. If you've got people that feel like, that it's not being addressed in a way that builds relationships and builds coalitions, then that makes communication, more difficult than it should be. And so, this is, you've got a learning curve there when you come in and you've never held public office, and you've never dealt with 118 House members and 59 senators and two powerful legislative leaders and a very powerful governor. So you have to figure out how to navigate that territory, and so there, whether they're justified or not, there have been criticisms that the mayor and his people really haven't done a good job of building those relationships.
And could that be that you have a mayor who considers himself to be not a part of the machine, but a part of the progressive wing, and then you have the machine that's kind of propping itself back into Chicago politics?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good way to distinguish yourself and get elected. When you get into office and operate, you have to deal with the institutions that are there and the people that are there. And so, uh, you getting elected doesn't automatically change the way politics is done, doesn't automatically institute a new culture, doesn't automatically make Illinois politics, less transactional or more ideological. Those are things that take place over time, but ultimately it's about, relationships and building those relationships, and that's that's an essential part of politics. You have to play with the game as it's made. Politics in Illinois, American politics in general, is a compromise and consensus kind of process. That's the way it's designed. And so that's a give and take. And when you have conflict, that's the way things ground to halt. That's ground to a halt. That's the way things become polarized, is because the system works really well in ratifying agreements. It doesn't necessarily work well when you've got a lot of polarization or people, dividing up into, opposite camps, and nobody wants to give an inch, and everybody wants, all of their agenda. That the system, the fragmentation of power at the national level, at the state level, in the city of Chicago, works against that kind of politics.
Well, it's at the speaking of the national level, it seems like power has been, for at least for the time being, consolidated to that the president is wielding more power than even the Constitution has set up. It seems like we have more of authoritarianism, and somehow he has masterfully, agree with or don't agree with, he's somehow masterfully moved himself into that position that some people would have looked to Chicago as having, that similar power on a local level that just does not seem to exist. Certainly not at
Yeah,
that level.
yeah, and that is broken down a lot within Chicago, and but the other parts of Illinois government have continued to operate. You've got a powerful legislature, a powerful office of governor created by the 1970 Constitution. You also have a very powerful city of Chicago because it is a home rule unit. And so, we've really changed the political dynamics pretty dramatically with the 1970 Constitution in Illinois. And those forces are still, contesting each other on, pretty strong footing. We're not one overshadowing the other. What's happened at the national level is Congress has basically abandoned its role as a separate, a co-equal branch of government, and the Supreme Court has been weak in responding to that, and that has resulted in the President Trump assuming a tremendous amount of power that I think I find surprising. Lots of people that kind of look at how the system's designed to work, think that we have a lot of the guardrails are not there anymore. Now the guardrails are still here. Part of what we're talking about, if we are going to limit the power of Chicago to tax, then you're up against Chicago's home rule power. And so you don't need, 60 votes in the House. You need a 3/5 majority. You don't need a simple majority of 30 in the Senate. You need 36 votes to take away taxing power from the city of Chicago. That's a home rule preemption. And so, whereas, saying that you can't, Chicago can't change minimum wage, that's an area where the state has exclusive power. They can preempt the city with simple majority. So, the city is not, Mayor Johnson is not without power in terms of trying to work this through, because there are situations where limiting him means you have to limit every home rule entity in the state, including Cook County, which is the only home rule county, and all of Peoria, all of the Aurora, all of the major Rockford, all the major cities. So there's a structure there that provides this give and take and this balance of power, and that's what's missing at the national level right now. Is the Congress has really given up on their role of balancing the executive, and it's been left to the Supreme Court, which reluctantly, maybe that's too strong a word, but has come in and limited the President Trump's executive orders and establishing tariffs and stuff.
So then the fact that this was voted out of committee at a 19-0, that is not necessarily an indicator that this is something that will pass through when it comes to the floor for a vote to take away the powers of home rule for the city of Chicago.
Yeah, we're not, these preemptions are case by case. So we're not taking away all of Chicago's power. The legislation essentially says, this is a preemption of this particular power according to a section of the Constitution that determines whether you need 30 votes or 36 votes or 60 votes or 73 votes. So it's piece by piece, but it does mean that you would have to build a coalition, maybe with some Republicans if you're really willing to do that, which the Speaker of the House has been reluctant to do. But we're in a negotiation. We're hopefully working around, trying to come to some compromises and get some things that means, Chicago obviously needs revenue. The state obviously needs economic and business development, as does the city. And, how are the ways that we can find, common ground so that we can do something that gives everybody a piece of what they want. And I don't know what that looks like, and it may not happen, but this is an engagement of a process that is designed to get you to talk and to come together and to compromise. And no, if you tell a lobbyist, I'll give you the same amount of money to pass a bill or the same amount of money to kill a bill, they'll always take the money to kill a bill. It's always easier to kill a bill than it is to pass a bill. That's just the way the political system is designed.
Well, and talking about that, they all know, from the governor to the General Assembly, all of the people in legislative position knows that all of the taxing bodies need money. So, there are plans to bring in advanced manufacturing to, as I say, look for ways to expand the tax base. Look for ways to expand the tax base that you could bring and attract businesses that you can expand the tax base that's going to bring in opportunities to employ people here that will expand the tax base, because you got more people employed, so you have more people who are contributing to the tax base rather than having to go to one group or the other all the time looking for those revenues. It seems to me that there is a reluctance to do those types of things, although they talk about those things. Like the South Suburban Airport, which we've been told 40 years ago that we need a third airport by the FAA. Now we have O'Hare and Midway that are having to, in O'Hare, that's having to reduce the number of planes that they're allowing to come in because they can't handle the traffic. And here we are, which brings about losing revenue. It's losing revenue. So why is there a reluctance to do something that the FAA has told us that we need to do? And now it's sort of, it has hit us smack in the face that we actually need to do it. But there's been a reluctance to do it by this governor. There was a reluctance to do it by the previous governor, and certainly some of the mayors of Chicago would not endorse something that would bring in thousands of jobs. Now we here are going to give $500 million to a CompuLab on the southeast side of Chicago to bring 150 jobs when you can use $500 million to build the airport that will bring 15,000 jobs. How does that make any kind of ration of sense?
Well, these things get caught up in regional conflicts. They get caught up in partisan conflicts, and we have avoided tough decisions and hard compromises. We've dug ourselves horrendous pension debt and I'm a retiree. I benefit from Illinois' pension system in terms of public employees and teachers, but we haven't made the hard choices. And that's, we've avoided choices, we put things off, or, we've made easy choices. And, just the head tax, everybody gets charged, and it's easy, it's easy to administer, and we have not done the difficult things. And that's leadership in, at the governor's office, that's leadership in the legislature. That's a lack of risk-taking and vision. And part of it is a political system that is transactional and risk averse and party dominated, and that means that we're not willing to spend the political capital. But if you substitute an ideological purity for transactional political parties, I don't know that you've necessarily advanced the ball. You need to find ways to get people together to solve problems, and that takes leadership and vision and risk taking. Speaker Madigan was a political genius at aggregating public power. He was never going to be, mayor of Chicago, and he figured out how to make the Speaker of the House in his hands, next, other than the governor, the most important position in Illinois state government. And yet, he was not willing to take risks. He was not willing to go out and say, okay, let's make the legislature strong, have greater capacity by having kind of like a congressional budget office where the legislature, works on the budget and is able not just to react to the governor, but to go out and, and be a partner in this. And, he was never interested in those sorts of things other than, winning elections and aggregating power. And so, you need to get political leaders and citizens need to reward, people that are willing to have vision and take risks. I mean, the people that, don't show up or don't think about who they're voting for, they obviously bear some of the blame in how we got to where we're at. But we do need, better leadership and approaching problems from, what benefits the state and what provides, equity and fairness. And, we've made some baby steps on trying to get, distribute new money for schools in a more equitable way. But, it is, we are reluctant to get out there and talk about how do we get beyond the next election, and that's, we've done way too many, the combination of that with where's mine doesn't get you very far in terms of having a plan, some way to get into the future. And, plans never work. You have to change them, but people with plans always beat people that don't have plans. And so, we need to build that capacity. I'm up on my soapbox now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, but I guess, and it's warranted because we have a state that is, I say we are, uniquely placed in a region that is central to the United States, but we have so much possibility and opportunity here. I think one of the other things is to getting more people involved in the voting process, to put more pressure on these public entities to do more. But when you have an election like we just had, which our primary election is really our general election in many respects, but when you have 23% of the electorate to turn out, that's hardly a statement to say that you're going to put the kind of pressure on people who are in public office to do more.
No, absolutely. And, when you have one party controlling the political process, and there have been times when the Republicans have drawn the map, but when you have partisan maps, the idea is to wring as much competition out of the map as possible. You want to maximize safe districts and then only have a few competitive districts. And that means when people go to vote, they really have no choice. They participate in the, if they don't vote in the primary, there's no choice at all when they get to the general election. And those kinds of one-sided districts tend to mean that the candidates in the primary are going to go to the right in a Republican primary, to the left in a Democratic primary, and you get more extreme people that are less willing to want to find common ground and compromise. So, there's the list of things that we should be doing differently is pretty long, and we need to do, certainly in our education system and our colleges, we need to do a much better job of civic education and getting people to participate and value and understand how the system is supposed to work, and and how short we often fall of really advancing what are, there's not a lot of disagreement on kind of the basic things that, basic American values, and it's the implementation and, and who gets to the fights over who gets to make the decisions that we fall short on.
Well, I was at a meeting on this past Saturday, which is the Coal Meeting Coalition of African American Leaders. And that was one of the conversations that came up. And this conversation comes up quite frequently about civics. Civics has been removed from the curriculum going back probably 30 years, maybe more than that they took civics out of the educational process. The only reason that you would do something like that is that you don't want for people to be more engaged in the process.
Yeah, well, and if you teach civics as, basic, legislative process, parliamentary procedure, there's nothing more dull than that. I mean, you have to make politics come alive, and you have to make people understand that's how we resolve conflicts. That's how we make decisions. It's one definition of politics is the socialization of conflict. Instead of picking up, clubs and guns, how do we get together and make decisions, and how do we build legitimacy? And if you memorize the preamble of the Constitution, you haven't gotten very far. If you have students engage what was the Declaration of Independence about, and how is that different? How did that give us the hope of a different future? You got to make it come alive. And I used to work with groups. I worked with a nonprofit that was involved with campaign finance and ethics reform, and we had good government groups that worked with us, and they were indispensable, and made a terrific contribution. But if we would have people who would say, we know what the right thing is, and if it wasn't for politics, then we could just do the right thing and everything would be fine. And and they thought that they were failing because of politics. And the reality is they were failing at politics. You have to go in and participate in the system and understand that you don't always win, but when you lose, you get another election, you get another roll call, you've got a structure and rights and processes that allow you to participate and to win over time. And that's what the object has to be, is to you want to win in the short run, but you also want to have the vision that you're working for. And so you teach civics as political education, as why do we have government? What are the options? And we just had a No Kings rally in 3,000 cities or whatever. And if you're not willing to participate in representative government, then a king or a religious figure, we've got a lot more world history dealing with them making decisions than a process that's supposed to represent the people.
Yeah, I would have hoped, and certainly would hope, that we would see that more people will want to get engaged. I think that what is happening on the national level, if it is not something that will move more people to be engaged in the process than have been in the past, I'm really not sure what would be what we see unfolding every day. I would venture to say that even a scholar like yourself could not have imagined that we would be observing what we're observing today, or experiencing it.
No, but you can work, get engaged with your schools, get engaged with your city and all of your local governments, and get engaged with civic organizations at the local level. There's a lot of need out there, a lot of opportunity, and some of our best leaders come out of those kinds of experiences of engaging a particular issue, trying to do something for their local schools, and gain an understanding and an appetite for making a difference at a higher level, and engaging. And so I have no magic solutions for making things better at the national level in the short term. But but I think those opportunities are out there, and 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 when you appreciate what it is to make a difference at the local level, and then can imagine how that can be translated into larger arenas and larger organizations, then that puts you on the track towards, towards building the kind of capacity that can make a difference.
Yeah, I believe that that's one of those caveats that we are seeing happening, because that we had put so much emphasis on national politics that we basically ignored the importance of local politics, because it is mostly that's impacting our lives is what happened on the local level. And I think that what we see happening now on the national level is really driving the importance of, getting involved on a local level. Look, we flipped from red seats to blue seats based on what's happening on the national level in these state legislatures. We've now flipped 31 seats from red to blue. And tomorrow night is going to be another test to see just how far, that we could get more people. And these seats were flipped, which, I like to note that people understand that it is not just Democrats flipping them, but there are people who are Republicans and independents that are saying that this direction that we're going in is not the direction that none of us believe in, whether we're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent. I like the idea of us being able to say we may differ on some political philosophies, but we have a fundamental belief in what is our Constitution, and what we believe as citizens and as Americans. And tomorrow night we're going to see another race down in Georgia, where we have in what is considered to be a ruby red district, to see how that election turns out in Georgia.
Yeah, no, and if we're just, again, we don't want to just be keeping score. We want to be, what's the, what do we do? What do these changes represent? And if the new boss is like the old boss, you really have not advanced very far. You need to make sure that you're either making changes, or you're making sure that you stick with the basic principles about representation, about consent of the governed. I mean, one of the biggest problems in Illinois politics is that the culture of corruption that has existed for such a long time, has made people question the legitimacy of what the process, the outcomes of the process. And so if people don't trust their members and trust the process, then it's difficult for them to accept that, this is a hard decision and we're making trade-offs, and, the long-term effects are good. That requires some faith and some respect on the part of the voters. And too often, we have forfeited that in terms of our political history.
All right, Dr. Kent Redfield, listen, I'm going to have you to come back, because we have just we've just gotten another great lesson in civics and what that means. And I love where towards here, where you said that it is not just keeping score, but it's actually putting people in place to make things happen. And I think that that is where we have to make sure that don't just change the face, but make sure that the face is going to make things happen. I really appreciate it. Dr. Kent, Professor Emeritus of Political Science at the University of Illinois, thank you very much. In Springfield, that is.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
All right, thank you so much. We'll look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.
Look forward to it. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Yeah, listen, folks, that is essentially what he basically is saying, to give us a real holistic view of about what this is. And it's not just a matter of Democrats versus Republicans or putting somebody in place. We as voters have the wherewithal that we can get involved and we can get engaged and we can make things happen, and we ought to get into it, understanding that, and for that purpose, to saying to people that this is not some sort of romantic approach where we're just romanticizing putting a person in a position and then leaving it there, but we are putting people into positions in order to make substantive change happen so that you can have growth for the future. Because in a great sense, politics and public policy is about the future. There's very few policies that are going to change the conditions of what's happening right now. But because of the way that government works and because of the process, is that it is about the future. And so what we do today is about hopefully building a better future for people going forward. And so one of the things that we didn't get to, we spoke briefly about Brandon Johnson. And he talked about Brandon Johnson being new into the political realm and certainly into a position like the mayor. I mean, he served as a Cook County commissioner for a period of time and got his feet wet a little bit there. But when you are now in the role of the leadership and you are in the role of the mayor, and and especially of a city like the city of Chicago, you have to have some people who can help you understand the landscape and some people who know the landscape. And I believe that one of the problems with Brandon Johnson is that he had as many people around him who were just as green about the landscape of Chicago as he was. And so therefore, if you have, in a sense, the blind leading the blind, that's going to make it very difficult for you as a leader to make good decisions, whether they're difficult decisions or not, but they're going to make decisions that are going to be productive for the city. I have noted and said that one of the mistakes that he made is not having people around who are seasoned, people who understand what the landscape of politics here, to help him move the agenda forward and how to navigate through those. For instance, what's happening between he and what's happening down in the legislature in terms of this whole piece of how he's going to get to getting corporations to contribute their fair share, or certainly contribute to the needs of the city of Chicago. That is one of the mistakes that he made. Now, I think that he certainly is trying to make those kind of adjustments. Whether it's too late or not, who knows what will happen in the next cycle, because I get asked the questions, well, are you going to support Brandon Johnson in the next mayoral election? Well, I don't even know who's going to be the the other candidates. I don't know if that's the case. I mean, if we bring somebody back like a Paul Wallace, hands down, it would be Brandon Johnson. I would certainly be saying that we would, as my committee, 10 by 10 to win, which is the independent Black voting bloc that we are working to build. And I think that is another area that we have to seriously focus on, that we can get beyond some of the idiosyncratic differences that we have, because by and large, all of us want better educational systems for our communities and for our children and for our grandchildren. And all of us want to have safer communities. And to have safer communities, that means you have to have a strong economic base where everybody who wants a job and is willing to work can have access to a job. And they should not have to have a PhD or a master's degree or even a bachelor's degree to be able to get into a good skill paying job. All of us want that. All of us want for there to be opportunities for people who want to go into business and to open up a business, small businesses, which create more jobs. All of us want to see our communities thriving in that way. All of us want to be able to drive down the streets of our communities and see that there are successful small businesses that are happening in our communities, providing opportunities. There are very few, if at all, of us who don't want that for our communities. And so when we can really, again, focus on those things that are the fundamentals that make for successfully thriving communities, that we as a voting base, we as the constituents, can organize our power so that we can have more voice of the people who are in these positions, whether it's a state or a city or a county position or a federal position, that they respond to the demands and to the needs of our communities rather than using these agencies that are essential to our communities, rather than using these agencies that are essential to our communities, that they will that they will work and respond to those demands. I had a clip that the question was, and this was Harold Washington, who was talking about how people have used how they have used the school system, all right, the public school system as a as this, mechanism for business rather than what it is for. And where he talked about the school system should not be controlled by the mayor. Take a look at this. This is Harold Washington when he was in his first term as mayor, 1983.
Well, let me dispel this laid-back position concept. I'm not laid back any place. First of all, I have made it absolutely clear that the responsibility of a mayor or any other executive official is not to involve himself into the administration of a school system, curricula, etc. That's not the purview of a politician, and you don't want that. The problem in the past in this city is that previous mayors have practically run the public school system, and they have used that system as a market for bond merchants, craft unionists, and contractors. We know that. It's legend. I happen to be the first mayor in 60 years who bothered to even attend the public school system.
So this was Harold Washington, 1983, who was talking about the using our public commons as these agencies for people to essentially get rich. That's what they're being used for, not for strengthening them to provide the resources for what they're there for. Listen, if you guys want to give me a call, you can, 951-221-8221, 951-221-8221. If you want to chime in on anything that we have talked about, anything that you've heard, but I think that it is essential. I think that it is essential that if we are going to change the culture of how politics and public policy is shaped here in Chicago, in Cook County, and in the state of Illinois. It is going to have to be that the constituency, the public, the voters, we are going to have to organize ourselves in a way that we become a serious threat to the people who are in public office, that we are saying to them that this is really not about personality. Now, and that we have seen where we now have in the city council of Chicago, 40% of the city council those seats are held by Black people. The mayor of the city of Chicago is Black. There are 6 Cook County board commissioners, and the board president of Cook County is Black. We have a host of commissioners in the water reclamation that are Black. We have a legislature that has 22 state representatives, and we have a Senate that is 10 Black state senators and 4 United States Congress people here in Illinois. 17 Black mayors in the suburbs of Illinois. And certainly of the suburbs of Chicago. So we have elected Black people to public office. The problem is that we haven't broken down the system. So while we have changed the faces, we have not changed the system. And we must change the system, meaning that those people who are tied to the machine of the way that politics was done, we need to change that. And meaning that we have to take some of those people out and replace those people so that the machine is no longer having a control. And what is the machine? The machine is those people who are in public office that are politicians. And there's a difference between a public servant and a politician. I define politicians as people who are owned by corporations or owned by a political party that the corporations fund and own. It's the same thing. This is where you and I have to understand how the politics of that infects our public policy and public officials, because each one of those offices are public offices. Those offices are technically, literally owned by you and I, the public, not by some corporation that wants to control the policies by which those public officials, which you and I elect to go into those public offices, but they are governing towards the person who, or the corporation that controls and owns them. That's where you and I, we have to change our behavior. We have to change our thinking. And we've got to get more people engaged in that process. And we certainly have to get more people who are younger engaged in that process. Now, this idea that they're not teaching civics, they're not teaching Black history in our schools, we still have to get our people engaged in the voting process. Young people, you have to connect the dots. You have to help them to connect the dots. For instance, every young person, I don't know a young person today that does not have a cell phone. And if you ask them how important is their cell phone to them, 99.9% will tell you it's essential. We're almost addicted to them. Okay, fine. This is how you connect the dots with them tell them how important it is. What if they lost the ability to have a cell phone? Now, voting didn't bring in the cell phone. However, voting and someone voting on policy that set the system in place in order for the technology of cell phones to come about, to be available to you. And if that system goes away, then, which is by public policy, which means somebody votes on policy to remove it or change it, that you won't have access to it. For instance, AT&T no longer provides landlines. And if you have a landline as an AT&T customer, you now have to, by the end of, I believe it's 2027, there will be no more landlines. And by a certain time, you have to change to this digital, which is almost essentially like a cell phone, to change to this digital. If you want to maintain the same phone number that you have, they are requiring that you change it. How did that come about? How did that come about? AT&T lobbied legislatures to change policy in order to set up systems for them to do and to put together to enforce this digital way of transmitting calls that is going to increase their bottom line. It's all connected. It is all connected. So this is about public policy drove that. So everything that a person is functioning with, whether it is your clothes, whether it's the food you eat, the car you drive, the home that you live in, the water that you drink, it is all related to some public policy that somebody votes to pass legislation. So we must, whether they teach it in school or not, we have got to teach it, and we have got to get our young people involved, and we've got to get people who are not so young engaged to understanding that they must be engaged in the process. I've heard some old fools say that they don't vote because they're going to do what they're going to do anyway. We cannot even accept that. We cannot accept that. And we have to be resistant to people who are trying to minimize the importance and the responsibility of being engaged in the voting process. And if it wasn't so important, you would not have people like your current administration that is doing all that they can do to try and erode the vote. So we've got to get ourselves engaged. Now, look, on a local level, because what happens on a local level drives what happens at the national level. And I am glad to see that Democrats, Republicans, and independents, because it's not just Democrats, Republicans, and independents who believe in a fundamental balance of our Constitution, that what we see happening at the federal level is not what we want for the country and where we want the country. We're not trying to roll the country back into the days of Jim Crow. And we're certainly not trying to allow for someone who is so absorbed with power that they can somehow just rip up the Declaration of Independence, they can rip up the Constitution and decide that they want to have an autocracy because they believe that they're entitled to do so. Well, I think that many Americans are saying, nope, that is not what we voted for. That is not what we sent you to office for. And you have Democrats, Republicans, and independents that across the country in all of these special elections that are saying and rejecting that. That is why you see them flipping seats from red to blue, not because they believe in the policies of all of the policies, but they have a fundamental belief that the people on in this current cycle of so-called conservatism or Republicans are not protecting the fundamental rights and certainly the fundamentals of the Constitution. And so they're saying that we're going to have to support people who actually have some basis of belief in that, and we'll support them now. And then we can argue about public policy and how we get there later on, as long as we have, a fundamental. So I believe that that's what is happening all up and down and across the country. We have an election that's going to be taking place tomorrow night. We were trying to get the candidate who was running down in Florida and Marjorie Taylor Greene's district were on this special election. We were certainly trying to see if we could get Sean Harris to come on with us tonight, and but his people were said that because this is the last day before the election, that it was going to be pretty difficult for them to get him on. All right. So some other things that have taken place. Pam Bondi was terminated this past week, not because of any other reason other than the fact that she could not get the retribution that Donald Trump wanted against his political enemies, and she couldn't get convictions against Attorney General Tish James, and she couldn't get James Comey indicted, and so Donald Trump was growing more frustrated with that, and of course with her mishandling of, in his view, the Jeffrey Epstein files. And so, but that's going to work its way through the system. But you have people who are in the Department of Justice that are resigning and resigning in droves because they are not, they didn't go there for what the president is ordering today. Prosecutors resign in droves because they refuse to investigate the murders of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And now you have the president who now wants to get rid of the American Records Act, where all of the records in the president's belongs to the public. His notes, all of that belongs to the public. But this, I believe that he wants to get rid of that so that he can basically get rid of the documentation that shows that if the president had been indicted and if the president had been tried, the president actually committed, would have been convicted for committed crimes. But, you know, we do have a criminal as the president of the United States, somebody who has been convicted of 34 felonies. And certainly has been found liable for sexual assault, and probably, according to a judge, sexually assaulted someone. So that's who we have as the president, and certainly they are demonstrating that. The president escalated his threats on Iran, and he's certainly thought that using this idea of rescuing this downed airmen, and I certainly hope that that is the case, that they were able to bring that person and rescue that person and bring them back. I certainly hope that that is true. But here is the problem. Here is the problem, and I'm not really trying to make light of it, but it's on a larger point, is that we should be able, and we're supposed to be able to believe what our president says to us. We as Americans, Republican, Democrats, or independent, whatever label that you fly under, we should be able to believe that when our president tells us something, that we could trust what our president is telling us. There is not a word that comes out of the mouth of this president that we could believe. Last week, he gave a speech about how they have blown up and they have destroyed Iran's Navy and their infrastructure, and how they didn't have this capability or have this capability.
As we speak this evening, it's been just 1 month since the United States military began Operation Epic Fury, targeting the world's #1 state sponsor of terror, Iran. In these past 4 weeks, our armed forces have delivered swift, decisive, overwhelming victories on the battlefield. Victories like few people have ever seen before. Tonight, Iran's Navy is gone. Their Air Force is in ruins. Their leaders, most of them terrorist regime they led, are now dead.
Now, he said that the regime is dead. He said that they didn't call for a regime, and he said that the Navy is gone. Now, this was last Wednesday when the president gave this address, this unhinged, sort of babbling address. And then, of course, he gave one today that was, I don't know, probably just as unhinged. There are people who now believe that this man is completely insane. And here he goes on to talk about how they have completely destroyed Iran, but yet Iran attacked us down these 2 planes, which they are telling us that they rescued one of them immediately when the plane went down, and then they just got the second over the weekend.
Should have done it with us, as we asked. Go to the street.
Well, this is the president talking about, that was the wrong clip, but this is the president talking about how NATO and some of our allies should have helped him. Now, and then I'm going to play another clip from one of the allies who explained exactly why they didn't.
Should have done it with us, as we asked. Go to the strait and just take it, protect it, use it for yourselves. Iran has been essentially decimated. The hard part is done, so it should be easy. And in any event, when this conflict is over, the strait will open up naturally. It'll just open up naturally. We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong. In the meantime, discussions are ongoing. Regime change was not our goal. We never said regime change, but regime change has occurred because of all of their original leaders' death. They're all dead. The new group is less radical and much more reasonable. Yet if during this period of time no deal is made, we have our eyes on key targets. If there is no deal, we are going to hit each and every one of their electric generating plants very hard and probably simultaneously. We have not hit their oil even though that's the easiest target of all, because it would not give them even a small chance of survival or rebuilding. But we could hit it, and it would be gone, and there's not a thing they could do about it. They have no anti-aircraft equipment. Their radar is 100% annihilated. We are unstoppable as a military force.
Yeah, that's very true. We are unstoppable as a military force. We have the most powerful military in the world. However, 2 days after that is when those two planes were shot down by anti-air missiles, ground-to-air missiles that they were able to shoot down two of our planes, two of our military planes. Thank God that the two pilots were not did not demise, but we do have 13 other soldiers, and I think of the 13, 6 of them were Army reservists. They were not even there for combat. They were reservists. The first of those to die were reservists that were hit by Iran attacking a base in one of the other countries that they're able to attack. Iran was no threat on the United States. Iran doesn't have any missiles that could hit the United States. Whatever the rhetoric that they say that Iran has been saying for whatever, but Iran has not exacted war on anyone. They haven't started a war on anyone, and this president decided to join into a war with Israel, while we are supporting Israel with billions of dollars in support for their security as well as for our national security. And then we go and we engage in the bombing of this nation without a real plan that even the brightest people whose careers were there could tell us what that plan is and what it's for. And of course, the president has escalated that by saying that if they do not open the Straits of Hormuz by 8 o'clock tomorrow, that they are going to, in many experts' eyes, commit war crimes by blowing up bridges, by blowing up power plants, which are war crimes that you cannot blow up bridges or infrastructure that civilians rely on. Those are the rules of engagement of war that internationally that many nations agree on, international law, as well as when in a sense where if we're in a conflict and some of our soldiers are captured, that they are going to be treated under certain treaties the same way that if we were to capture soldiers from other nations in a conflict, that there's a certain code of conduct of how we operate. This person that we have now is completely incapable of comprehending that. Even if he were capable of comprehending it, I'm not sure that he would even want to. But I don't think that he is capable. I don't think he's capable of really understanding the responsibility and why these systems are in place. That he wants to treat this as though he is treating it like one of his failed businesses. That's not government. Government is not a business entity that you are looking to make a profit. Government is that of systems that are put forth for the common good. That's what government is about, and that's what governing is about. And over many, many years, and thousands and thousands and thousands of people who have worked and dedicated their lives to fight for and to put systems in place to make things a little bit better as we have progressed through the way. I think that the damage and the erosion that this one person has caused, that it will take way beyond most of our lifetimes, those of us who are 50 plus, to see a course correction, because we need a serious course correction. And it's not going to happen by the bunch that is there now. But here is a response to, this is Claude Mulheret, from one of the French Parliament, who is basically admonishing Trump for his actions that he took without engaging any of the allies.
After assembling the most powerful army in the world, failing to win a war against a middle power, causing oil and gas prices to skyrocket, and delivering incoherent speeches, the golfer from Mar-a-Lago shamelessly admits to being stunned by the Iranian response, which was entirely predictable, and now calls for help from his allies whom he was insulting just yesterday. And they reply to him, "You didn't consult anyone, you have no plan, and we have no reason to follow you blindly into the fog." Trump, the only elephant in the world who walks around with his own China shop, now has no choice but between two equally bad options: to withdraw shamefully, pretending, without convincing anyone, that he has achieved his objectives, or to trigger an escalation with results that have been known in advance since Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan. A quagmire, and in the end, a disgraceful departure, leaving the field open at the time to the communists, to Daesh, or to the Taliban.
Empathy at all, and so he none of this will really matter to him. The only thing that will matter to him is that people say all kinds of wonderful things about him. He's really like a 12-year-old in an 80-year-old body. But Barbara Jordan, who was a freshman congressman when Richard Nixon was, when they were holding hearings about impeaching Richard Nixon at the time for the cover-up of Watergate. And Barbara Jordan put it in these words about impeachment.
If the impeachment provision in the Constitution of the United States will not reach the offenses charged here, then perhaps that 18th century Constitution should be abandoned to a 20th century paper shredder.
And that's where we are. That's where we are today, is that if in fact what we see happening here today does not meet the basic measure of impeachment, then as Barbara Jordan says, if it hasn't met the 21st century, then we need to put it into, I'm sorry, they have not met the 18th century measures or something like that, then we need to in today's, put it in a 21st century paper shredder. But I don't think that there's anybody, including Donald Trump's sycophants, could say that this man has not earned to be impeached a third time. And it is the responsibility of Congress to do their job. Whatever the Senate is going to do, whether the Senate is going to convict or not, the Congress has a role and a responsibility to do its job, and that is to put the president in check. That is the role of Congress. That is the role of Congress, and it's certainly the role of Senate. Now, they're talking about the 25th Amendment being put into place. The 25th Amendment is not going to happen because the only thing that you have around the president is you have the president who, there are no guardrails around the president. There are no people within his cabinet that have the courage to say to the president that what you're doing is in violation of the Constitution, in violations of the rules of engagement, any of that. There's nobody there that is going to do that, from his DOJ over to the Department of Defense. Nobody is in that position that's going to do that. Now, if the president engages in asking for people to blow up bridges and to blow up power plants, the people who are in the military, the people who are in charge of those people in the military, by law, are responsible for following the law, and they have a duty to uphold the Constitution. And if they don't, they will be in violation of the law, and they could be brought to justice. Now, remember, there were 46 members of Richard Nixon's cabinet that went to prison, including his attorney general that went to prison. Nixon never served nor was tried for a second because Gerald Ford pardoned him of any incidents. And then later on, in almost to his deathbed, Gerald Ford acknowledged that that probably was a mistake to pardon Richard Nixon. But 46 members of his cabinet went to prison. And I'm not sure how many of these people will end up going to prison. Certainly many of them could, because there's a strong argument that many of them were involved in activities that the president asked them to be a part of. And I'm going to go back to I want to play this, give you some parts of it, because some of you probably have never heard of Barbara Jordan, probably have never have heard this, but Barbara Jordan basically was a freshman congressman who gave Congress at 1 o'clock in the morning, who gave Congress a constitutional lesson. And it was said that it was Barbara Jordan's speech that led the president's cabinet members, his attorney generals, to go to President Nixon and tell him that the jig was up.
I recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Jordan, the purpose of general debate, not to exceed a period of 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Jordan.
Mr. Chairman, I join my colleague, Mr. Rangel, in thanking you for giving the junior members of this committee the glorious opportunity of sharing the pain of this inquiry. Mr. Chairman, you are a strong man, and it has not been easy, but we have tried as best we can to give you as much assistance as possible. Earlier today, we heard the beginning of the preamble to the Constitution of the United States. We the people. It's a very eloquent beginning. But when that document was completed on the 17th of September in 1787, I was not included in that we the people. I felt somehow for many years that George Washington and Alexander Hamilton just left me out by mistake. But through the process of amendment, interpretation, and court decision, I have finally been included in we the people. Today I am an inquisitor, and hyperbole would not be fictional and would not overstate the solemnness that I feel right now. My faith in the Constitution is whole, it is complete, it is total. And I am not going to sit here and be an idle spectator to the diminution, the subversion, the destruction of the Constitution. Who can so properly be the inquisitors for the nation as the representatives of the nation themselves? The subjects of its jurisdiction are those offenses which proceed from the misconduct of public men. And that's what we're talking about. In other words, from the abuse or violation of some public trust. It is wrong, I suggest, it is a misreading of the Constitution for any member here to assert that for a member to vote for an article of impeachment means that that member must be convinced that the president should be removed from office. The Constitution doesn't say that. The powers relating to impeachment are an essential check in the hands of the body, the legislature, against and upon the encroachments of the executive. The division between the two branches of the legislature, the House and the Senate, assigning to the one the right to accuse and to the other the right to judge. The framers of this Constitution were very astute. They did not make the accusers and the judges the same person. We know the nature of impeachment. We've been talking about it a while now. It is chiefly designed for the president and his high ministers to somehow be called into account. It is designed to bridle the executive if he engages in excesses. It is designed as a method of national inquest into the conduct of public men. The framers confided in the Congress the power, if need be, to remove the president in order to strike a delicate balance between a president swollen with power and grown tyrannical and preservation of the independence of the executive. The nature of impeachment, a narrowly channeled exception to the separation of powers maxim. The Federal Convention of 1787 said that. It limited impeachment to high crimes and misdemeanors and discounted and opposed the term maladministration. It is to be used only for great misdemeanors, so it was said in the North Carolina Ratification Convention. And in the Virginia Ratification Convention, we do not trust our liberty to a particular branch. We need one branch to check the other. No one need be afraid. The North Carolina Ratification Convention, no one need be afraid that officers who commit oppression will pass with immunity. Prosecutions of impeachments will seldom fail to agitate the passions of the whole community, said Hamilton in the Federalist Papers number 65. We divide into parties, more or less friendly or inimical to the accused. I do not mean political parties in that sense. The drawing of political lines goes to the motivation behind impeachment. But impeachment must proceed within the confines of the constitutional term, high crime and misdemeanors. Of the impeachment process, it was Woodrow Wilson who said that nothing short of the grossest offenses against the plain law of the land will suffice to give them speed and effectiveness. Indignation so great as to overgrow party interest may secure a conviction, but nothing else can. Common sense would be revolted if we engaged upon this process for petty reasons. Congress has a lot to do. Appropriations, tax reform, health insurance, campaign finance reform, housing, environmental protection, energy sufficiency, mass transportation. Pettiness cannot be allowed to stand in the face of such overwhelming problems. So today we're not being petty. We're trying to be big, because the task we have before us is a big one.
That was part of the speech that Barbara Jordan gave, the first half of her speech that she gave during the impeachment hearings for Richard Nixon in 1972. And that speech, many argued that her speech was the speech that led to her or his attorney general, that led to his attorney general going to the president and his cabinet saying to him that that there is really nothing that they could do for him, and the best thing that he could do would be to resign. And Richard Nixon decided not to fight because he was considering fighting. Now, there are also those who said that if Richard Nixon had decided to fight, that he may have been impeached, but he would not have been removed from office, right? But, you know, those are the Monday morning quarterbacks. But the idea that Richard Nixon was not impeached, and certainly he decided to leave office, and of course, this president has been impeached twice, and because the Senate did not have the courage or the character to do the right thing by removing this man from office, is what we are dealing with now. I believe that in some ways that they didn't remove him from office because many of them, or certainly some of them, support what he is doing and believe in what he is doing, but they don't have the courage to openly admit or acknowledge it. But by keeping him in place, to me, that is an admission that you support something, because if you don't support something, it's pretty basic that you don't stay there. I mean, these people are elected to office. They don't work for Donald Trump. They've allowed for him to commandeer Congress, and they've allowed for him to play into the woeful ignorance of the constituency, and rather than going and them educating their constituents so that the constituents would not be loyally supporting their own destruction, they've decided to just become complicit. That's what has happened. Now, speaking of ignorance, you've seen my post. You saw my post where I posted about Stephen A. Smith and Nick Cannon. Now, Nick Cannon, I think that there must be something wrong with him, but that notwithstanding, that you have to be careful of assuming that because someone is famous, that they are somehow politically astute. And I think that we have two prime examples in Stephen A. Smith and in Nick Cannon, are two woefully politically, socio-politically ignorant people, both of them. Stephen A. Smith can do all the yelling and all the, gyrating that he wants to do. And he may be entertaining to people in basketball. I'm not the least bit impressed, with his antics. With basketball, I don't even watch much of his commentary because, I think it's just kind of buffoonish to me. However, politically, in understanding the political landscape and understanding the political process, both of these dudes have shown just how ignorant they are of the political process, both of them. Now, Stephen A. Smith came out this past week and said that he regretted voting for Kamala Harris because the Democrats don't have a clue, and the Democrats, still are out of touch. Well, if the Democrats are so out of touch, then why are the Democrats winning across the country? Why have the Democrats flipped 34 seats from Republican-held seats, most of which in ruby red districts, to Democrats? And why have the Republicans not flipped one blue seat to a Republican seat in any of these elections? Not one. Flipped, that is. There is another election that's going to take place tomorrow in Northwest Georgia, where you have an election, a runoff that is in deep red Georgia, of people in this special election, of people who are running to replace Marjorie Taylor Greene, who decided to resign from Congress. So we're going to see how that race turns out. Now, it is not expected for Sean Harris to win. He's running as a he would call himself a moderate, a Democrat, but he is what he considered to be a more centrist, whatever that means, because I just still don't understand what people are talking about. I'm a centrist, this, that, or the other, somewhere in the middle. Whatever that means, being in the middle. But these two characters are so blatantly ignorant, that it is just astonishing to me. It's astonishing to me that because they have millions of dollars and they have some fame, it does not mean that they are in any ways fit to be giving political so-called commentary. Now, the idea of the Democrats being out of touch, what he failed to do is to give any example, any substantive example in his bloviating or whatever it was that he was doing, any example that he gave. Not one did he show where to give any kind of support to what he was saying about the Democrats. Now, the Democrats don't control Congress. The Democrats don't control the House. They don't control the Senate. They don't control the legislature. And whatever it is that the legislature wants to do, the Senate, and whatever they want to do, for the most part, by simple majority. Now, the Democrats do have leverage where if they want to pass a bill and need 60 votes, they're not going to be able to get it because Republicans only have 53 seats. So there, the Democrats have leverage. All right, well, listen, that's going to do it for me on this Monday night's edition of the People Show. Make sure you tune in next week. Monroe Anderson is going to be right back here with me for another edition of the Monday night edition of the People Show on intellectualradio.com and iHeartRadio. See you next week.